In 19th century England, a man could walk his wife into a crowded marketplace, tie a rope around her waist, and sell her to the highest bidder. Not in secret, not behind closed doors, in public, and no one stopped him. That sounds like one of the most brutal customs in history. But here's the part that makes it harder to understand. In many cases, the woman wasn't dragged there. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she chose the buyer. And sometimes she demanded the sale herself. Which means the real question isn't how could men do this? It's why did this make sense to the people living through it? Victorian England wasn't the elegant world we imagine. For the working poor, life wasn't refinement. It was survival. Entire families crowded into single rooms. Disease spread quickly. Food ran out often. A single missed paycheck could mean eviction. A single injury could mean starvation. Alcohol wasn't entertainment. It was how people endured the days. Marriage in that world wasn't built on romance. It was built on necessity. 2 incomes were better than 1. Shared rent was cheaper. Loneliness was a luxury few could afford. But when survival failed, marriage didn't break gently. It collapsed. And when it did, there was nowhere to go. Divorce technically existed, but only for the wealthy. It required years of legal battles, special acts of parliament, and sums of money the poor would never see. For working-class couples, marriage was permanent. Once married, a woman lost her legal independence. She could not own property. She could not control her wages. She could not make legal decisions on her own. Her husband became her legal identity, and the husband was legally responsible for her for life. If she left him and became destitute, he could be arrested. So when a marriage turned violent, or unbearable, or simply impossible, both people were trapped, unless they found a way to make the marriage disappear without the law noticing. That way became something shocking. Public wife selling. The husband would bring his wife to a familiar place, a market, a pub, a town square. A rope would be tied around her waist or neck. The rope wasn't accidental. It marked her as property, as something transferable. Money would be offered, sometimes a few coins, sometimes a symbolic amount, and the crowd would gather. This wasn't treated like a crime. It was treated like a ritual. The rope signaled that responsibility was changing hands, from one man to another. But here's the detail that refuses to sit comfortably. The buyer was often already known, sometimes a neighbor, sometimes a co-worker, sometimes a man the woman had already been seeing. Which raises a question history doesn't like answering. Was this violence? Or was it negotiation under pressure? For some women, this was the only escape available. There are accounts of women who negotiated the terms, women who rejected low bids, women who refused buyers they didn't trust. Some even smiled when the transaction ended, because once the sale was complete, the old marriage was socially finished. She could leave the man who beat her, leave the man who drank her wages away, leave the man who trapped her in hunger. But this was not empowerment, it was survival. A woman had to endure public humiliation to escape private misery. She had to be treated like property to stop being trapped like one, and the crowd accepted this. Which leads to another uncomfortable question. Why didn't anyone intervene? People didn't react with outrage. They reacted with familiarity. Some laughed, some debated prices, some offered opinions, because everyone understood what failure looked like. A broken marriage meant homelessness. Abandonment meant the workhouse. And the workhouse meant disease, separation, and early death. In that world, dignity mattered less than survival. This ritual solved a problem no one else wanted to touch. It prevented starvation. It prevented state intervention. It kept families out of institutions everyone feared. Which explains why the authorities stayed silent. Officially, wife selling wasn't legal, but enforcement was rare. Police officers often stood by. Courts ignored the transactions. Why? Because the outcome was convenient. The original husband was no longer responsible. The new man accepted the burden. and the woman stayed off public assistance. The system didn't approve of the practice, but it benefited from it. As long as it worked, it was tolerated, until the system itself began to change. Over time, laws shifted. Women gained limited rights to property. Divorce became slightly more accessible. Social expectations began to change. And wife-selling slowly faded away. Not because people suddenly became compassionate, but because desperation finally had alternatives. When people no longer needed the ritual, they abandoned it. Which brings us to the final question. What was this really about? Wife-selling wasn't about cruelty alone. It wasn't tradition for tradition's sake. And it wasn't simply about men exercising power. It was about a system so rigid that ordinary people had to invent their own escape routes. When laws fail long enough, people don't always rebel loudly. They adapt quietly, even if that adaptation looks horrifying centuries later. History isn't filled with villains who wake up wanting to cause harm. It's filled with people making the least destructive choice in a world that offered them none that were good. And that's what makes this story unsettling. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't secret, it happened in public, with everyone watching.